Of the passing of conservative icon, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. On the Charlotte's Morning News Hotline right now, I would like to welcome back to the show U.S. Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina. Senator, good morning to you.
Bo, greetings on a at least snowy day in Winston-Salem.
Yes, sir. I appreciate so much you being with us this morning. And first and foremost, your thoughts on the passing of this conservative icon.
Well, Justice Scalia is a loss to the court, a loss to the country. He was a brilliant legal mind who understood and adhered to the Constitution and, more importantly, the principles of the separation of power and, I think, federalism.
And Senator, of course, there are two sides to this. Of course, I mean, when this news is breaking on Saturday, I mean, everybody wants to be considerate and mindful of the idea that a family has lost a loved one here, and this is a man who, is admired and loved by many. But he's also, in his years on the court, was a very, he was a political lightning rod of sorts. And of course, everyone in this election year starts thinking about, well, what happens now as it relates to the Supreme Court? And shortly after the news broke, of course, President Obama made a statement regarding this. He said that in due time he will nominate someone. Though people had speculated before he made his comments about whether or not the president might even decide to try to make a recess appointment. Looks like that won't happen, but he will try to nominate someone. And there are those on the other side of the aisle, your side of the aisle, that are suggesting that that's going to be a difficult process for the president.
Well, it would be a difficult process. I think if you look back 80 years, you haven't seen a justice that was nominated and confirmed in the last year and a half probably, of any administration. So let me just say up front, it isn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. What the president does, that's his decision. But the Senate, in my estimation, will not consider the confirmation of a justice. And I think, Bo, if you just look at the words of Democrats, it was Chuck Schumer that made an argument to his caucus that no Supreme Court justice should be considered or confirmed in the last year and a half of any president's term. So I'm sure that Chuck will forget that if the president makes a nomination. But the reality is that this should, and it will, be part of this presidential campaign. And as weird to some degree as this campaign has been so far, you would expect another twist and turn. So this just adds to the intrigue of this presidential campaign year.
Talking to U.S. Senator Richard Burr here on Charlotte's Morning News following the story over the weekend, the passing of Antonin Scalia. Now, talk to me for a second here about this is he was appointed by President Reagan, known as the most conservative, most would argue the most conservative member of the Supreme Court. And the loss of Antonin Scalia, this represents a real possible turning point for this Supreme Court, because now you have a swing vote here that whoever ends up being chosen here, this could really turn the tide of the way things have been versus the way they may be.
Well, I think that's certainly the case, and that's why it really does highlight the importance of this election cycle. And Judge Scalia was the majority. He wrote the majority for the D.C. versus Heller, one of the most important Second Amendment decisions from the court. And I might say, as staunch a conservative and protector of liberty as Scalia was, his best friend was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, mm-hmm. A Democrat justice, and it shows just the respect that Scalia got from his colleagues on the bench.
Talking to U.S. Senator Richard Burr from Winston-Salem this morning, talking about, obviously, Antonin Scalia, the Supreme Court justice that passed away over the weekend.